Hey, good Monday morning. It's Tim here, and it's looks like a beautiful morning starting out. It's going to be in the 70s today, close to 80s. So tomorrow's going to be the big hot one, but today's going to be a real nice one. I wanted to tell you about a story about my one of my first concerts that I ever went to. It was up at the Cape Cod Coliseum, and it was with Van Halen, who had I don't even think they had their first album out yet, and Black Sabbath. And it was in 1978 in September. I don't know the exact date, but it was at the end of the summer, and we bought these tickets at Four Seasons in Arlington Center. That's been long, long gone, but it was a ticket agency right in the corner there down where the old police station was, and we got tickets at the beginning of the summer and had to wait the whole summer for this thing. And a few of us were going, so it wasn't like we were all going to just jump in one car. So we decided to thumb up there. And me and my buddy Joe, I don't want to name last names just in case they don't want that mentioned, but my buddy Joe and I, we were close friends back in our youth. We went out onto the McGrath Highway and started thumbing because at that time my mother lived down in Somerville, and we took off from there, backpacks full of beer and clothes, but mostly beer, and we set out. And other guys that were going with us, there was like a crew of us, Ricky, this guy Berger, and Phil, and then there was another little class of guys, Joey and Ralph, and we all wound up just heading out there, and we all made it down to the Cape. I remember we got picked up on one ride, and we just got a ride out to the outskirts of Boston, and then we were thumbing for a long time, and then this dude in a pickup truck with it was a black pickup truck, two black Dobies in the back, picked us up. He had a glove compartment full of goodies, and we ended up grabbing some, and he drove us all the way down to the Cape Cod Coliseum because he was actually going to the show himself the next day. So anyways, no, actually it was on the Sunday. So this was on a Friday. And we got down there, and sooner or later everybody started coming, and we parked in the parking lot, and it was a beautiful summer weekend, and we, cold beer was flowing, other things were flowing, girls in mini skirts and leather jackets everywhere, and motorcycles pulling up, and just a wild, wild time. That parking lot was full all weekend. And Friday night, it was the Edgar Winter and the Allman Brothers Band, and we didn't get into that, but we could hear it. They had the doors open, it was blasting. And Saturday afternoon was the wrestling matches with Andre the Giant firing midgets. He had like 15 midgets inside the ring, and he was throwing them all around, and we got into that. We were just standing at the door, the guy let us in, and we were our minds were a little boggled, let's just say, from some of the stuff we had on us, and it was just a trip to see. And then Sunday, it was Van Halen and Black Sabbath, and we camped out next to the Coliseum the whole weekend in just two-man tents. There was a bunch of other people come down there and from the projects, and we all just gathered around, and it rained. I remember Saturday night rained pretty hard, and it was a tough sleep, but we all made it through the night and got up, and the shows down there at that time were general admission, and so that meant you could just go in and sit wherever you wanted. And by the time we went in there, there was a bunch of us, and then other guys and gals that came down from other parts of the town showed up. And so we were all at one point just passing each other and just, rocking on, and then they would go their way and we'd just stay on the car. But we went into the show, and I remember we went in there and we got like seats over, I believe, to the left. And the Cape Cod Coliseum back then was just a skating rink, basically, with a bunch of chairs in it. And Van Halen come out, and they were on. They were like fresh and new and straight out of California, and just coming out with that first devastating new album, that first album. And Eddie Van Halen was just unbelievable on guitar. But they opened up, and I remember everybody was just stunned. They were like, who are these guys? You know, we were there to see Sabbath. But Van Halen, they came out Running with the Devil, Eruption, that whole first album, couple tunes from the second album that wasn't even made yet, but they had them in the bag, some covers. It was just a wild, wild show. And everybody was like, wow, you know, who are these cats? And then Sabbath came on, and I know that they got a lot of flack, you know, during that tour that Van Halen blew them off the stage. And like I said, Sabbath were on their way out. The drugs had done a number to them, and you know, Ozzy was about to leave, and which eventually ended up getting kicked out. But it was just near the end. But that night they came out and they just tore the place up. And they opened up with Symptom of the Universe from Sabotage, which is one of my favorite albums by them. And they just roared through a friggin' dynamic set. And that place was just going nuts. It was like a typical 70s concert. Frisbees flying through the air, things, you know, lighters being lit up, and a lot of other stuff. And it was just wild. Everybody was just on their feet the whole time, going crazy. Ozzy was friggin' nuts. He was probably jammed up on the stage. It's been so long, I can't remember, but I know he come out. I remember he had this big Uncle Sam's hat and doing the, you know, the peace sign thing, and everybody was just going crazy. And that year, it turned out that was like one of the #1 shows for that whole year, because they did like a survey of the best shows, and it was also the loudest show. I guess the decimals in there were crazy, and I remember it was nuts. And, you know, I remember when I took off, you know, my father was looking at me, and I lied to him. I said I was going over my friend Joe's for that we were going to sleep over and all this stuff. And he was just kind of looking at me like, yeah. And, okay. We were young. It was a different time. You know, we'd just take off. But he didn't know I was thumbing. And anyways, you know, when it was all said and done, I remember walks down that track to go to Susie, to go to the Cumberland Farms, and we were nicking friggin' stealing Susie cues because we were starving. We were bathing in the Bass River, which we weren't really bathing. We stole a thing of shampoo, and we're shampooing our hair. It was like our Woodstock, to be quite honest with you. It was like a weekend of bands, just a weekend of wildness. Met some crazy people down there, people I'd never seen again. And, you know, a lot of people that went to that show now are gone. You know, it was definitely the show that, like, it was like the worm got definitely planted, you know, like that saying says. It just, you know, once we went to that show, nothing was ever the same again. In some ways that was good, and in a lot of ways that was bad. That was like the beginning of drugs, heavy drinking, heavy partying, you know, just not giving a damn, and just freedom and craziness that, you know, young people go through. And like I said, that was a different time than now. A lot of kids now, it's still out there and it's still crazy. It's probably maybe even crazier than ever. But a lot of people learned from our mistakes. And, you know, a lot of kids don't drink. A lot of people don't do drugs. And that's a blessing, because they don't have to go through the hell that many of us that started off with it just being a party had to go through. But, you know, that show was legendary. It was one of my first shows that I ever seen. It was just, you know, I can't remember shows that I went to last year, but I'll always remember that. I remember me and Joe, we had a thumb back, and it wasn't as easy. You know, I think we got 2 rides to get there, maybe 3. But on the way back, we walked for miles, and it was so hot, and we had those backpacks on our back. We were drinking warm beer, and finally somebody picked us up, and they drove us all the way into Boston. And I remember we got out where the old, in Kenmore Square, I believe, and it was where the old Playboy Club used to be, and it was still there. And I remember we got off, and we were just so exhausted, and we walked and walked and walked, and I don't even know how far we walked till we either got a bus or whatever. But I remember crawling into my house and just throwing my stuff on the floor and just throwing myself in the chair. And my father was sitting there reading the paper, and all of a sudden he lowered it and he looked over at me, and he could see the shape I was in. And he was like, "How was the weekend sleepover?" And I just was like, And he just raised the paper back up, and that was it. But that was such, that was in 1978, and everything about that show was just decadent and wild and crazy, and everybody that we met we were all doing the same thing. It was just a gathering of people from that decade. It was coming to the end of the 70s. We were young kids. I mean, I was a kid. I was like fresh out of junior high school. I don't even know. Like I said, we were really young. And to be doing the stuff that we were doing, it could have turned out a lot worse. But it didn't, thank God. And it was fun. It was not so fun, but it was definitely memorable. And those two bands that night just blew that little place away. And me and Carol were down the Cape last year, the year before, and I wanted to go see the old Cape Coliseum, and it's not Cape Cod Coliseum, and it's not nothing no more. But when we went there, we heard it was a bunch of things. It was basically a post office warehouse, and I remember walking up the ramp and just looking in there, and you could still see all like the staff holding and the ceiling stuff, and it was that place, and you could still see on the front of the building, just in very faded letters, Cape Cod Coliseum. It was unbelievable. And I walked around that little hallowed ground for a little while and just remembered that show and many others, the Kinks, Alice Cooper, Jay Giles, the Clash. We seen a bunch down there, and it just was a great memory, and it was great to be there. And we drove away, and that will always be with me. Those shows, they were part of my youth. I'm still a concert guy all these years later, but those ones, and I think we paid like $20 for a ticket compared to the prices they want for tickets now. But anyways, I just wanted to share a memory with you, and I wish you all a great day. Enjoy this weather and take care of yourselves. And if you remember that show, maybe drop a little comment in there. I'm sure some of you went to that thing because that place was packed. But have a great day, and always a pleasure to see you. Be well.